It was 2020 and the world would come to a halt after a flu-like disease seemed to be spreading the earth. As for the NBA, they had to adapt. That's when the NBA bubble was introduced, a $190 million operation where all NBA players, NBA employees, media personnel, and franchise staff would be isolated in the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida with no way out. For some, this was an unpleasant experience, and for others, this wasn't a bad situation at all. As for ex-ESPN broadcaster Rachel Nichols, this proved to be an experience that would soon change her life for time to come.
I wish Maria Taylor all the success in the world. She covers football, she covers basketball. If you need to give her more things to do because you're feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record on diversity, which by the way I myself know personally from the female side of it, go for it. Just, find it somewhere else. You're not going to find it with me.
An ESPN anchor is apologizing for implying that a black colleague got opportunities because of the color of her skin.
How deeply sorry I am for disappointing those I hurt, particularly Maria Taylor.
Nobody back at ESPN told me that there was an open line to my hotel room and anyone who looked at the feed could see me. And at least one person decided to just sit and watch and started spying on me like I was their own personal television show.
It's no secret that ESPN, like the majority of media and sports media, are not the most honorable organizations in the world. However, for ESPN specifically, none of their previous actions can compare in shadiness to specific events that occurred during the NBA bubble. As a matter of fact, the following event we will shortly get into may be the most shady thing ESPN has ever done. On July 4th, 2021, various reports would come out reporting that leaks of racist comments were made by ESPN reporter Rachel Nichols. As a result, the larger community were appalled with her statements, prompting her to be quickly fired. But was Nichols actually being racist, or was this just one side of the story? And if it was, what were ESPN's real intentions behind the audio leaks? Today, we'll be deciphering exactly what happened to Rachel Nichols, how this attack was orchestrated by ESPN, and the untold truth as to why this setup was done in the first place. But before we get into that, who is Rachel Nichols, and is she really a bigoted, racist person? Welcome to Sportsphere. Let's get into it. Rachel Nichols was born into an American family in Potomac, Maryland, as Rachel Michelle Alexander in October 1973, and it wouldn't be long until she would begin to develop a passion for sports. She would later attend Winston Churchill High School, which was also where she began writing and editing for the school newspaper, before graduating in 1991. After graduating, Rachel pursued her studies at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. She would gain experience through summer internships at multiple renowned publications, including the Washington Post. And it was during her internship at the Washington Post where she caught the attention of Michael Wilbon, a prominent sports columnist who saw potential in her, pinpointing her confidence as her key attribute. Interestingly, one of Rachel's later assignments was covering the Chicago Bulls' practices as a freelance newspaper reporter during their three-peat championship run. Initially, she observed the sessions and took notes without asking questions. However, on one occasion, she caught the attention of Michael Jordan himself, where he would call her out to speak. This interaction later led to regular conversations between the two, and Rachel would later credit this experience for greatly enhancing her journalistic skills. At the age of 21, Rachel Nichols would earn her bachelor's degree from Northwestern University, and with experience already gained in the NBA with notable cosigns, her career was looking promising. Nichols would later be hired as a sports writer by the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, covering the University of Miami's football team, and Miami Dolphins as a sports writer, before later joining the Washington Post to cover various other sports. After establishing herself as a reputable sports writer for nearly a decade, Rachel Nichols would eventually make the transition to broadcasting, which was a role she would prove to later strive in. In 2004, she was hired by ESPN as a broadcaster, a significant and proud moment for Nichols, considering ESPN's reputation as one of America's most esteemed sports networks. However, it wouldn't take long for Nichols to experience betrayal from the very organization that took her in. Nevertheless, after securing the broadcaster role at ESPN, Rachel Nichols became a notable figure on various programs, including SportsCenter and multiple countdown shows. Additionally, she served as a recurring sideline reporter for Monday Night Football and NBA broadcasts. Soon she would develop a strong role and presence on these shows, contributing to her growing influence, and would slowly become a recognizable face in the realm of sports media. Like everyone on TV, she had some haters, but she was largely considered as a clean-spoken, non-confrontational analyst that was an expert in communication. After 9 or so years at ESPN, a bigger opportunity opened up for Nichols, which she later accepted. After leaving ESPN in January 2013, Rachel Nichols joined CNN or Turner Sports and would host her own show, Unguarded with Rachel Nichols, the organization's first sports-related program in 12 years. She continued to gain a respected reputation in sports media, earning praise for her interviews with NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell and boxer Floyd Mayweather about touchy subjects CNN wanted her to speak on. Nichols also worked as a sideline reporter for NBA on TNT, and made regular appearances on the popular basketball show Inside the NBA. That being said, 3 years later, her career would take another turn after being recruited by the ex-president of ESPN, John Skipper, who heavily valued her skill set. Following her 3-year stint at CNN/Turner Sports, Nichols would return to ESPN and secure a spot on one of their major shows, The Jump. Additionally, she was assigned the responsibility of conducting sit-down interviews with sporting and other celebrity figures, discussing sensitive topics and presenting viewpoints that ESPN were told to endorse on behalf of the mainstream media. As Rachel Nichols' career progressed, she maintained a likable and professional reputation at ESPN, wouldn't be involved in any heated exchanges, let alone show any signs of prejudice against any race. However, as a result of the global situation in early 2020, labeled a pandemic, the NBA would continue its games in an isolated bubble at Disneyland, where media, players, and staff lived in hotel rooms. And this is when everything would go wrong for Rachel. Amidst the pandemic, a problematic situation would occur on the 25th of May involving George Floyd. What followed was an abrupt ending to the pandemic nationwide, and hundreds of thousands of people in every American state would protest on the streets for racial equality. As a result, ESPN would receive increasing pressure by unnamed parties to include more diversity in hiring, specifically with broadcasting roles for the public to see. And when we talk about diversity in hiring in the midst of the nationwide Black Lives Matter protests, this obviously meant the pressure of hiring more Black people. And although Rachel Nichols was set to make her first appearance as a host of the NBA Finals during the bubble, due to the pressure by their ownership as a result of a New York Times article, ESPN would begin pressuring Nichols to step down from her role as an NBA Finals host to be a sideline reporter, despite a contractual agreement that solidified her role. And in replacing the veteran broadcaster Nichols, ESPN would look to endorse ex-college athlete and now sports media personnel Maria Taylor.
New York Times did an expose in July of 2020 on racism at ESPN and the lack of opportunities for people of color. And the executives at ESPN said what I think people would expect, all the right things about we'd like to give more people more opportunities, we're continuing to grow, all of those things. And around the same time, I got a phone call asking me, would I step aside for Maria to host the NBA Finals?
Although Maria Taylor was an experienced broadcaster, the truth is that Nichols has been in the sports media game since as early as the Chicago Bulls three-peat with Michael Jordan, and Taylor's experience simply wasn't a comparison. In 2009, Maria Taylor would acquire her first role as a reporter and host, covering various sports at IMG College. She then became a prominent sideline reporter for ESPN2, covering college football, women's college basketball, and volleyball. After just a year with ESPN2, Maria would later join the SEC network as a reporter and analyst, getting more opportunities to cover prestigious games, including national championship football games. And in 2019, she achieved a significant breakthrough by becoming a host of NBA Countdown, alongside Jalen Rose, Richard Jefferson, and Jalen Williams, a major achievement for Maria. Her career would further skyrocket just a year later amidst the NBA bubble, but this was not without controversy.
You can go back to 2019, 3 years ago. ESPN gave me a new contract. I'd already been there with The Jump. And in the contract was that I was going to host the NBA Finals. They put everything in writing in the contract. They put out a big press release about it.
Despite the contractual agreement of Nichols to host the NBA Finals with The Jump, amidst pressure of diversity requirements by ESPN, in July 2020, they would make a last-minute decision to upgrade NBA Countdown with Maria Taylor to the main show for the 2020 NBA Finals, while The Jump hosted by Rachel Nichols was demoted to the pregame show. Although Maria Taylor is a well-experienced media figure with around 10 years of professional broadcasting experience up until this point, Rachel Nichols had nearly 3 decades of experience in this field and was only now getting her first opportunity to host the NBA Finals. And anyone with common sense would see that she was a more deserving candidate. But at this time, this was a difficult opinion to stand on due to the political landscape of America. Regardless, ESPN followed through with their agenda, demoting Nichols to a sideline reporter role and promoting Maria Taylor to a main host of the NBA Finals. For the following year, things seemed like they were normal. However, a major twist would be unveiled around a year later. On July 5th, 2021, just 2 days before the NBA Finals would commence, reports from various mainstream media sources would come out, relentlessly labeling Rachel Nichols as a racist as a result of leaked audio that had just been released by the New York Times. Countless online articles would claim that Nichols said that Maria Taylor was only hired because she was black. But what did Rachel Nichols really say? Let's take a listen.
They said to me, hey, instead of hosting the NBA Finals, why don't you do Doris's sideline reporter job for the NBA Finals? For Maria to do the hosting for them. Yeah. There you go. So, I have declined. They are feeling pressure because of all of that. I wish Maria Taylor all the success in the world. She covers football, she covers basketball. If you need to give her more things to do because you're feeling pressure about your crappy one-time record on diversity, which, by the way, I myself know personally from the female side of it, go for it. Just, find it somewhere else. You're not going to find it with me.
Did Rachel really insinuate any underlying racism here? I don't think so. In fact, even ESPN didn't seem to have a problem with it, considering they held onto the audio leak for almost a year before leaking it to the New York Times.
HR did a full investigation into it. They told me that I had done nothing wrong that required any kind of discipline. Then 6 months later, they actually gave me a contract extension and a raise. And they actually elevated Maria in that same period as well.
Nevertheless, 2 days after these news reports came out, on the day of the NBA Finals Game 1, Nichols would release an apology for her actions.
But I also don't want to let this moment pass without saying how much I respect, how much I value our colleagues here at ESPN, how deeply, deeply sorry I am for disappointing those I hurt, particularly Maria Taylor, and how grateful I am to be part of this outstanding team.
Despite the apology, Nichols was still dropped from her sideline role in covering the NBA Finals beginning on July 7th. And guess who ESPN brought in to replace her? Yes, the infamous Malika Andrews. Before we continue, we've just released the first ever Sportsphere limited edition merch drop. 25% of all profits will be donated to Operation Underground Railroad, an operation that helps fight back against human trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children, the fastest growing crime in the world, yet the mainstream media refuses to bring awareness to it. Support the channel and support the fight against evil. Store link in the description. Back to the Nichols and ESPN situation. You might also be wondering, how did ESPN even get the recording of Nichols' phone call? Well, this is where it gets dark. In this obscure camp-like bubble scenario, it later came to light that media personnel, including Nichols, had an application on their phone that gave ESPN company staff access to their microphone and camera. And with Rachel apparently not turning off her line, she would have her conversation spied on by an ESPN employee in Connecticut.
Nobody back at ESPN told me that there was an open line to my hotel room and anyone who looked at the feed could see me. And at least one person decided to just sit and watch. I was their own personal television show.
Although sources claim it was just one person, when we consider ESPN's true intentions, their actions suggest that this was a coordinated operation by ESPN as a whole.
They held on to this tape for a year, just kept it in their pocket. And then when there was a point they wanted some leverage with their own situations, they fed it to the press.
In a web of calculated moves, ESPN appeared to orchestrate a narrative to tarnish Rachel's reputation, seemingly driven by their own hidden agenda. But why? Why did ESPN wait almost a year to release these audio leaks? And why July 4th, 2021? Well, after doing some digging, I think we may have found the truth. The leaked recordings capturing Rachel Nichols' private conversation during the NBA bubble in July 2020 would resurface a year later after being published by the New York Times 2 days before the 2021 NBA Finals series between the Bucks and the Suns. This was significant because considering it was during the final stretch of the NBA season, it saw the contracts of sportscasters including Maria Taylor coming to an end. Matter of fact, if we dive deeper, ESPN's motive behind the Rachel Nichols leaks quickly come to light. In the days leading up to the ESPN leak of Nichols, on June 30th, 2021, an exclusive New York Post article was published, shedding light on recent contract negotiations between ESPN and Maria Taylor, which was followed by many more articles revealing details of the heated negotiations. After rejecting a near $5 million offer from ESPN in 2020, Taylor audaciously demanded a ridiculous $8 million salary, claiming she deserved Stephen A. numbers.
That this is not the first time, and it's definitely not the last time, that society is going to tell you that you are less than, that you matter less than, that you are less valuable than the male version of you.
There's no doubt that Maria seemed to be very misled by modern feminism culture and seems to be promoting a delusional mindset so far stuck in a victim mentality that she seems unaware of her true broadcasting value compared to Stephen A. Smith. In addition, despite Taylor demanding an $8 million contract, she seems to ignore the fact that Rachel Nichols, as a veteran in the game, with double her journalistic experience and a higher profile in the TV world, was on just a $1.5 million salary at ESPN. Regardless, the truth was that ESPN was already pandering to the feminist agenda, considering they already offered Taylor a near $5 million contract, which she objectively didn't deserve. However, it seemed the delusional mentality of Taylor was too much for even ESPN to handle. By early 2021, tensions seemed to be flaring behind the scenes, where ESPN seemed reluctant to offer Taylor the original near $5 million contract. Instead, they reduced the figure to a range between $2 to $3 million, sparking internal conflict that even prompted question marks surrounding Taylor's hosting of the soon approaching 2021 NBA Finals. Subsequently, a couple days later, in what seemed like a dark but strategic move, ESPN would coordinate with the New York Times and leak Rachel Nichols' audio recording, which was followed by a slew of coordinated mainstream media articles labeling her a racist, conveniently taking attention away from the heated Maria Taylor contract negotiation headlines. And this is how Maria Taylor responded after the articles and audio was released.
Although all women make 82 cents to the dollar on white men, you make 62 cents. They may tell you that you don't deserve that promotion, even though you know you do. They may tell you that when you get the promotion that you only got it because you were black. But we know that's not true.
As a result, right after the completion of the 2021 NBA Finals, Maria Taylor would swiftly depart from ESPN and join CBS Sports on a $5 million contract. And this was when even more misleading narratives surfaced, suggesting that Rachel's apparent racist comment was the catalyst of Taylor's departure, a notion far from the truth. Rather, the reality was that ESPN didn't want to cater to Taylor's absurd demands of Stephen A. numbers, but in fear of the potential backlash of being labeled as a racist organization against black women, they would use Rachel Nichols as a pawn to take attention away from Maria Taylor's contractual situation. Although ESPN will never admit it, the timing exposes this as the most logical conclusion. Regardless, the intricacies of the situation seem to reveal ESPN's efforts to control the narrative and protect their own interests, while presenting false narratives as a distraction from the truth. But as a sports media network owned by Disney, this is largely unsurprising, and this is something we have all come to expect.
Imagine yourself working somewhere 25 years for a job, and they want to use you as a scapegoat to fix something that they've been up for years. It don't work like that, and that's not fair to nobody of no race. And that's how I took it.
Despite these obviously unethical acts by ESPN, Nichols was ultimately used as the scapegoat and was fired later in the year for these apparent racist comments. And it would be the following year in September 2022 where Nichols would sign her latest contract, this time with Showtime. And earlier in the following month, she would appear on All the Smoke with Matt Barnes and Stephen Jackson in a tell-all interview about the controversial situation with ESPN. Back in July of 2021, after numerous reports labeled Nichols as racist, many people blindly believed the allegations, severely damaging her reputation. And it wasn't until over a year later where she was finally able to give her perspective on the situation, flipping the attention back onto the organization that set her up, the organization that has committed acts far more shady than anything Rachel has ever done in her professional career. Although this didn't have long-lasting effects on her career, similar dishonest acts committed by the mainstream media happen more than we know, and more often than not, made-up narratives, weaponizing the media's power, can have much more detrimental effects than what happened to Rachel Nichols. As for ESPN, there's no doubt that in an attempt to tarnish the reputation of Nichols, they've discredited their own reputation. With Disney now looking to sell major equity in ESPN, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the once most esteemed sports network in America. As for now, it seems like more and more people are starting to wake up. If you enjoyed the video and want to support the channel, check out our first ever Sportsphere merch drop. We've got 2 custom designed hoodies and t-shirts in black and white only. As mentioned earlier, we'll be donating 25% of profits from these designs to help fight back against the fastest growing crime in the world, human trafficking. Specifically the trafficking and sexual exploitation of children, which America is the #1 consumer of, something the mainstream media is scared to talk about. Every merch drop we do will be limited and for a good cause, so get in quick. Join the movement. Check out sportsphere.store, the link will be in the description. On that note, if you haven't watched Sound of Freedom, do yourself and the future generations of children a favor and see it. It's a chilling movie that sheds light on an issue that Hollywood, Disney, and the mainstream media are trying to discredit and divert attention away from. I wonder why. We'll leave some links in the description if you want to find out more about Sound of Freedom and other ways you can help fight against the heinous $150 billion industry that targets vulnerable children. Anyways, thanks for watching Sportsphere, and we'll see you in the next video.